A big hello and welcome. It's Kate from Zen Stitching, and I'm so excited to be joining you again today for another one of our chats with our artists from the Making Zen Online Retreat. Today, I am so excited to be joining Cynthia Hauk from Mindful Creative Muse on the socials. Hello and welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Kate.
Oh, I'm absolutely thrilled, and I'm so excited that you're joining us. This is your first time, and it's also one of the things that I love about what you're going to bring to Making Zen is you're bringing something that's maybe a little bit different to what we usually do. Usually we do stitching and we do all that kind of stuff. Would you like to share what you're going to be teaching us at Making Zen?
Yeah, I'm so excited to share it with you all. So, I like to think of this as kind of the foundational level for any sort of artist. So, regardless of the media that you're working in, what we're going to be exploring really is combining simple mindfulness practices with our mindset and our art making. So, whether you're doing stitching or fabrics or mixed media or multimedia, drawing, painting, it can really be applied to any of those areas. And we're going to be diving into really simple 5 minute, what I like to call 5 minute mindful art experiments. So it can be a great way. I just know for myself, as being a longtime artist in lots of different media, that as a creative, sometimes we can struggle with getting started, with feeling stuck in a project, with feeling stagnant, with wanting to try something new, with feeling like what we're creating isn't good enough. And these are all really great practices to kind of re spark that for us.
Oh, I love hearing that because I think no matter where you are in your creative journey, whether you're beginning, intermediate, or you've been doing it for a very long time, there's always those humps, isn't there, where you have those questions. You're like, well, how do I get started, or what do I need to do, or all of those kind of things, just to kind of get your those creative juices flowing again. Cynthia, I'd love to know because this is such a great and wonderful way of diving into creativity. How did you come across this way of working?
Mm. Well, I would say I was always creative since I was very young, but I had a couple of pivotal moments for myself personally in my late teens and then my late 20s and again in my 40s that were all centered around moments of struggle, I would say. So, being treated for cancer or struggling with anxiety, these hurdles that I had personally that I supported myself through art as well as other things, but I supported myself through art. And what I noticed for myself is I had a meditation practice and I had yoga and mindfulness and art, but I used to keep everything very separate. And then I realized that actually they're all so naturally intertwined. Our ability to come back to what's happening right now in the present moment and be kind to ourselves as we're creating is such a natural instinctive way I've found for us to nurture our creativity. And so I had my own personal journey, and then that led to me feeling really inspired. And I'm not exaggerating, earning 20 certifications in my master's program, and then just my own way into the practice. And now I hear all the time from other creatives that they feel like they naturally drop into a flow state when they're creating, or their creativity feels really nurturing and supportive for them. And so these are just kind of little seeds that can be planted into the practice that we're already just starting or cultivating. So that's my kind of long, colorful history that brought me here.
I love hearing that, and how you were saying that you kind of compartmentalized all these different aspects of your life, and then kind of brought them all together to become one, which is so beautiful. I think we all have a tendency from time to time to do that, don't we? Like it's this is happening here, and this does this, and so to pull it all together and in such a way is so inspiring to hear. Not to mention that you generated all of these wonderful things to share with others through your own experiences as well. I'd love to hear you say you have, did you say 20 certifications? That's that's fabulous. I'd love to hear what kind of things that you draw upon from your certifications that you kind of naturally integrate into what you share with us.
Yeah, so a lot of my certifications are in the expressive arts, which is just combining multiple art modalities. So maybe it's drawing and painting and movement, or just multiple different art expressions. So a lot of it is in the expressive arts. I have a lot of training in mindfulness, meditation, somatic yoga, restorative yoga, a lot of trauma informed practices, as well as even ecotherapy. So there's a lot of people have heard of like forest walks that they're prescribing now in Japan. So just this influence of when we're both in nature and we are nature, how we can support ourselves. So a lot of the work that I do is very simple and accessible, and it really is more holistic. So it's not just about what we're doing in our creative practice. It's also how we're showing up to the practice and how we're treating ourselves. I would say I also used to be very type A personality, had a very strong inner critic. And I hear a lot of creatives that I work with mention that they have these thoughts around struggling or comparing what they're doing to other people, or feeling like what they're doing isn't good enough. And I, over years, have instead learned to really embrace the inner critic, that it's a part of us that is trying to keep us safe when we're stepping to the edge of our comfort zone, which is exactly what we're doing when we're being creative and innovating.
Mm.
And so a lot of the core foundation of the work I do in my own personal creative practice, but also when I teach in classes or teacher trainings, is really making space for that part of us that maybe is an inner self-saboteur to our creative process, and how we can instead move through that in a way that just feels really good. The whole point is that we are supporting ourselves in the process.
Mm. Oh my goodness. I think what you said will just resonate with so many people. It totally resonated for me. Being type A and inner critics, there's something that I think, well, I was going to say a lot of us have. For those of us that do have that kind of tendency, and you say you've kind of worked through it, what are some of your suggestions or ways of being gentle with yourself, so that, like you say, understanding that it's all part of the experience, but also learning to work with it, I guess, rather than wrestling with it, might be a way to think about it.
Mhm. Yeah, I think one thing that I always remind myself of, and anyone I'm working with, is that it's very human for us to have that experience, to have those thoughts of internal judgment or comparison, or having some of those blocks. So one is just to be really kind to yourself and name that this is not a unique experience. It is something that we all experience at some point in our creative practice. And it is something I still struggle with at times. And instead, now I just notice, oh, I must be really onto something right now. I must be really exploring something that is lighting me up, that I'm curious about, that's just on that edge of my comfort zone. And now this part of me is coming up to keep me safe, essentially. So I just name and normalize it first. And then oftentimes, instead of eradicating or quieting our inner critic, I like to embrace our inner critic. So sometimes I'll literally just rest a hand on my heart and say, like, thank you, I got this. The other really practical things I do that I teach is to set what I like to call creative limitations. So when I was doing my master's program like 20 years ago, I was talking with one of my professors about this, and it might be setting a timer and I'm going to create for 5 minutes, or I'm going to only work with this one fabric or this one stitch pattern or this one marker or paper or these 3 colors, and really to just limit it. Because I think what can also happen, I've noticed for myself and a lot of other creatives, is we can just feel really overwhelmed, and we can have too many choices or feel like there's too many different paths we could go down, and then we can get the analysis paralysis and just stop. And so
Mm.
another part of that is just having those creative limitations. The other thing that I usually will say too, because the inner critic is all about creating barriers that stop us from starting or finishing. So another barrier might be that we feel like we don't have the time or we don't have the space to create. And so really simple ways that we can have, I'm just going to work with this small art journal. I'm going to have this small section on my desk or my kitchen table that's just for my creative practice. Or I know every Sunday for 30 minutes, this is my time, and I'm communicating that with my family or friends. And so it's just very small, little practical things. I think the last thing I'll just say is that I really feel strongly that like slow and steady wins the race. So the more we can show up in these small incremental moments, the more we are leaving space for our creativity to expand versus like needing to have a really big deposit that I need to create for a half day or go on a huge retreat. Those are wonderful when we can do that. And a lot of times it's not as accessible for us in our daily lives. So I use lots of little tricks to encourage my inner critic to play along with me instead of stopping me.
My goodness, what you just shared had so many gems, so many wise words of wisdom, and there's a lot to unpack in that. And I absolutely love that you kind of put your hand on your heart and say, "Thank you, inner critic, I got this," because that's a really nice way just to reaffirm to yourself that it's okay. And even me just doing it now, I'm like, oh, I feel good doing this. It's a nice thing to do. And like you say, just being aware of your inner critic and then acknowledging that you must be on the edge of a breakthrough and that it's scary, but it's also exciting. And so I think and it all comes down to awareness too, doesn't it? Once you can be aware that this feeling means this, then you can kind of work through it as well. Oh my goodness, that was just amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I I'm probably going to have to go back and listen to this interview again to be able to get all of those things that you shared, which is just beautiful. Um, I also really like that you talk about having some creative boundaries per se, like working with set amount of things, or like limited colors or a limited palette, that kind of idea. But also when you finished up and you said it's incremental, slow and steady rather than one big chunk of time. And I think that's a really lovely thing to do because we do put so much pressure on ourselves to put time aside and it's got to be a day and, all that kind of stuff. And like you say, ideally that's wonderful, but realistically, sometimes being able to find that much time can be a little bit of a challenge. So, like you say, incrementally, and then you do because once you start, it always creates more of those what if questions as well. Like, and that's where it starts to get exciting, and the momentum kind of keeps generating as well. I always think to myself, it's a marathon, not a race. Just to remind myself to go steady and to embrace the tortoise as opposed to the hare, which is generally my mode of operation a lot of the time.
I love that. I feel like part of that too for me when I hear it is that we're also not focusing on an end destination. It really is about can I enjoy the practice that I have, even if it's for 5 minutes, or even if I feel like I don't know what I'm doing, or it's this new experimentation I love what you said about removing some of the pressure, because
Mm.
I think that pressure is just not serving us. Sometimes I always say I can work better under pressure, which sometimes is true. And also, there's lots of other ways I can nurture myself so I can still create and just feel really good in the process. So I like that it opens up. I remember when I was doing my master's program years ago, it's just a very different way of working. I did not make art in this way 20 years ago. It was very much I have an end thing. I'm working on my thesis. I'm getting critiqued by all these external people. I have this focus and this goal. And it's really great to have goals, but also I think it's just how we're being with ourselves when we're exploring our creativity is just so huge, because this is hopefully a lifelong practice that we're exploring with creativity. And the more we can enjoy it and give ourselves space without pressure, I just feel like the more we'll stay with it.
And that's such a great way to think about it. You're absolutely right. If you take away the pressure and give yourself a little bit of space, you'll enjoy it a bit more too, and which means you want to keep returning back to it again and again. Which and like you say, it is a lifelong practice. I think it's a bit like breathing in a sense, isn't it? Creativity. I definitely think so anyway. Um, I certainly hope it's a lifelong practice for all of our listeners and people who are joining us for Making Zen as well.
Yeah. And I also will often say that once we're in the practice and we give ourselves that space and that pressure, as you mentioned, is removed off, then we can kind of follow the breadcrumbs and see what is lighting me up. What do I feel curious about? I might have started with this, creative limitation, but now maybe I want to add in more colors or other fabrics. And we're exploring that from a place of curiosity and play and excitement instead of overwhelm and analysis paralysis. It's just a different way that we can step into it that I've found for me personally and thousands of students now that I've been so lucky to work with, that it's a really helpful way to deepen with our creativity.
Yeah. I'm curious, Cynthia, what does a day in your studio look like for you?
Ooh, I love this question. So it really can vary depending on the projects that I'm working on and where I am in those projects. So I know everybody's different. I tend to work on multiple different things at once. And part of that, I think, does tie back into this sense of curiosity and play, because if I start to feel stuck on one particular thing in a certain art journal, on a painting, on a drawing, with a collage, then I'm not abandoning ship, but I might set it aside momentarily to allow that spark to continue elsewhere and then come back. And actually, I do this as just to mention briefly, I mention this for students that when you are in your studio or at your house or out in nature and you're creating, if you can, as a practice, to stop yourself just before you reach that end point, like when you feel like you're still in the flow, to stop yourself, because then when you come back to the practice the next day or the next week, there's still kind of an aliveness and a momentum that you can pick up on,
Mm,
instead of feeling like I'm not really sure what I want to do next. And then now that's where you're stepping back into it. But sometimes it is the full creative process and I just dive right in. It might be new, it might be working on multiple pieces that are ongoing. Sometimes it's also sitting in my I have a separate art studio and then an art desk and then portable art journals. So I have different spaces I create. And sometimes it's literally flipping through old artwork to get inspiration or journaling. Sometimes I am out in nature and I'm looking at different objects and shapes and then feeding that into my practice. So when I was doing my master's program years ago, I remember one of my professors also said, she said, strike while the iron is hot. And at first I thought she meant just continue to make work, And then I realized afterwards, and when I talked with her later about it, instead what she was suggesting is to stay in the flow, and we can stay in the flow in our creative practice not by producing necessarily, but by continuing to show up. So that might be showing up to your journal or that fabric piece you're working on. It might be showing up in your space. You're creating the space to connect with what I like to call your creative muse, or that inner creative spark. And again, part of that is just removing the pressure off. And I've found the more that I've had that type of practice, the more willing and easy and excited it is for me to show up again and again, and then follow what is alive in that moment. Versus, I've never been the one to have like one practice, and I know I'm doing that one thing every time, and so it's allowed a bit of space for me. So that's very often what my practice looks like.
that's so interesting to hear and such great advice, particularly working on a couple of different projects at any one time. It always means that you're never going to be in that moment where you say you feel like you've stopped a project and then you get to the next point, which is like, what am I going to do next? If you've got different projects at different points, then you've always got something that you can pick up on and kind of like keep going. And that's such a great piece of advice, I think. Like you say, just keep that momentum going so that next time you're in the studio or next time you've got some time to create, you can kind of just pick it up rather than, when you looking at a blank piece of paper or a blank piece of fabric and you're like, what am I gonna do? That in itself can be like a stopping point. So if you've got something where you can just pick it up and keep going, that's brilliant.
Yeah, I think there's something really interesting I've noticed too for myself and students I've worked with. There's something interesting that can happen when you do have multiple different projects going, even if they don't seem to be connected, there oftentimes are these little threads of maybe it's a certain color or a pattern or a theme or an intention or a question that you're asking yourself as you're creating that can kind of be this through line. And I've said for many years, one of the things I love most about making art is this collaborating with chance, that I don't know necessarily where everything is leading. And so when I have multiple different pieces going at the same time, it's almost like I can take a bird's eye view and notice, like, oh, what is my art communicating back to me right now through these little patterns and threads? So I like that interplay back and forth.
And that's such a great phrase, collaborating with chance. That's so fun. I love it because I agree with you. I think the element of chance or the mystery that is involved with creating is what I find fascinating, because you might start with an idea in mind, but where you end up, for me anyways, quite likely very different to where I anticipated, which is good because I think that's where the magic happens, isn't it? Where you're doing something and there's the what if question, or you make a mistake, but the mistake takes you down a road that is actually more interesting than what you had anticipated doing in the first place as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, me too. It's so much fun. So I was wondering, do you have any rituals or habits that help you get into the creative flow?
I do. Yeah, it was interesting. You mentioned the breath earlier, where you said that art feels a lot like the breath. And I do have, I refer to them as breath doodles, but they're very simple doodling, drawing practices that mirror and reflect back what's happening with our breath in the moment. So it's essentially a form of art meditation. And I do that very often at the start of my practice as a creative warm up and to really arrive here. And I share that all the time in my online classes. That's very often a kind of starting point. Um, and I do that for a lot of different reasons, because I don't know about you or anyone watching this. Sometimes we can show up to our creative practice and we still have our like to-do list running, or I need to run to the store later, or I need to take care of this for somebody else, or my back hurts, or I don't feel like I have the right supply, right? There's all these different this different commentary that can happen. And that's very natural. It's what our brain does. And I find by doing really simple breathing and doodling, I really can zero in very quickly within a matter of a minute of noticing
Mm.
what's happening with my breath, what are the sounds I'm hearing in the room, how am I holding the pen or pencil in my hand, how am I feeling my hand moving on the page, and literally seeing this tracing of the breath, a reflection. They actually call it, it's referred to as externalization. You can see something within you out on the page, and that might be it's breath in this instance. I have other practices where I'm focusing on what's happening emotionally for me, what's happening with my thoughts, all tied in with this mindful practice with art making. And it's for me, it's always been the quickest way in for me to really fully arrive right now. And then I can
Mm.
be with what I am creating in front of me instead of thinking about the grocery list or taking care of the dog or, so that's definitely a go-to for me and when I do a lot of my classes.
That's beautiful. It's something that is so important to be able to do, just to become grounded and to become present. And like you say, let go of those a million and one things that we always have running around in our heads when we're doing anything, pretty much. And I'm curious, is this do you like to do this first thing in the morning, or is it just when the opportunity arises? How do you approach your moments of creativity?
Yeah, I love that question. For the longest time, the last 15 years, maybe I've had a morning pages practice. If anyone is familiar with Julia Cameron and her book, The Artist's Way. So I very often will have a writing practice first thing in the morning. I sometimes have transitioned that and I do what I instead call like a morning musings practice or a mindful musings practice, where I'm doing some of my art creative practice first and then I go into the writing. But a lot of times I'm taking mini art breaks. So I'm doing breath doodles, or what I refer to as aqua doodles, these different quick practices in between a Zoom call. Maybe I'm doing classes and it's in between that, or at the end of my day and before I'm then going and seeing family. And then I also have structured time that I have scheduled where I'm in my studio and I know I'm going to be doing like sitting down. So it is, I think, I think for me, I approach it kind of two ways. I have my structured time, but also I used to teach yoga for many years, and taught like as a co-teacher on 200-hour YTT trainings. And people always say for any yogis out there, that we are off the mat, how we are on the mat. So how we're showing up in our practice is then how we show up out in the world. And I see that very similarly with creativity, that it's not something that I need to have scheduled and separate. I can literally take 2 minutes, 5 minutes throughout my day and do a quick breathing and doodling practice, or flip through some magazines and look at images, or simply just notice what's happening outside. There's different ways that I can integrate creativity, peppered. So I do a lot of peppering throughout my day. And then the other thing I'll just say on that is that I forget the article now, but there's a really interesting article where they talk about the space when we're not creating, just having the actual space for our subconscious to do its work. So we might doodle or stitch or make art, and then we might put it down and we're washing dishes, or we're in the shower, we're driving our car, and that's when we get these little insight aha moments. I still see that as part of the creative practice. I'm not doing an intentional practice or a ritual, but I do have a deliberate ritual of making space for whatever that creativity is to come through. So I see that as still being connected.
Yeah, I love that. So we can now look at washing the dishes as a creative part of the creative project.
I used to joke, I lived at a yoga center for a year, and I used to say I did dishwashing meditations, which I say it jokingly, but it's very true, like just noticing the warm water and the suds in my breath. And I do think that could help our creative practice, just having more spaciousness and grounding.
I think what I really like about that is I completely agree with you. It's so important to be able to have the space, walk away from a project, particularly if it's, like you say, in an area where you're stuck and you're just not sure what to do next. You can put it aside and or let the brain kind of continue to work on it whilst you're doing other things, not consciously working on it. You kind of put it to one side, and then you can go off and do the other things. But it's so true, isn't it? Because a lot of people think, oh, washing the dishes, it's such a chore. But if you think about quite often when we have the space to have a shower or something like that, where we're not thinking particularly about any one thing, that's when the ideas tend to happen, isn't it? It's like it's giving the brain that space to continue to work on these um, little challenges or things problems, and it will solve them for us whilst we're doing the other things. So embracing the washing up is definitely a great way of reframing the whole experience.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the more that we can just make space in general for creativity to be a living, breathing thing that is not sequestered to our art journal or our art studio for 20 minutes on one day a week, the more that there's kind of these little invitations for it, I just see it as feeding our creative well, and that it
Mhm.
kind of overflow and fill out in other ways in our daily lives.
Yeah. And I also, going back to what you were saying a moment ago about peppering these moments throughout your day, which is such a wonderful visual analogy. Like I just can see all these pepper bits throughout your day. And is that something that you consciously set out to do, or you've just found that as your practice has evolved, that these are poignant moments within your day that seem to naturally happen, although may have been consciously done at the beginning? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think years ago, so when I was doing my master's program, as an example, at the same time I was running a photography business. I ran that business for 7 years before doing this art teaching business now in my seventh, eighth year. And I noticed, because I was doing full-time master's program and then full-time photo business, that was already art related, it did become a challenge for me to have the time and space to then devote to my personal creative practice. And so at the time, I would have these deep dives of like, I'm going to really do a lot of creative work for my master's program. And then we're on Christmas break and I'm not making any art for a few weeks. Or I finished my thesis and I didn't do anything for like several months.
Not surprised.
And then, yeah, which I've heard from a lot of other people who've done masters and dissertations. And I think we do sometimes need that ebb and flow and rest. And I often say it reminds me of like winter with trees. It might look quiet, but underneath the surface, there's a lot of, soaking up of the water and there's still all this growth. So I think there's pros and cons to both. But for me, I found it was partially a kind of a necessity of how can I find ways to stay more engaged with my creative practice when I feel really overwhelmed, really busy. I feel like I either need to do this huge, huge project that takes a lot of time or nothing at all. So it was kind of finding a equilibrium point for me, like that pendulum that swings from side to side, that I realized actually, if I can just do lots of little things with little rituals and creative limitations right here, that still keeps me in the flow. And then I still might, I have many times when I tell myself, okay, I'm going to do 5 minutes or 20 minutes right now in this one little journal. And then because I have the space and time, it's 4 hours later. And I'm like, oh, I have no idea where the time just went. But had I not given myself permission to just begin in that small way, then I probably wouldn't have done that at all. And so I know everyone's really different. That's what I found worked for me. And then now it's been so many years and infusing it with mindfulness combined with creativity that it's just kind of a daily practice where the peppering now is more natural. But initially, I feel like it was kind of out of need to how can I stay more engaged with my creative practice?
We were just balancing a full-time job with full-time MFA. That's huge. I'm impressed because both
Yeah.
of them require so much time and dedication. So to do both at the same time, that's hats off to you. And you live to tell the tale and smile.
And actually, it really, I think, in a beautiful way, changed my creative practice. I already had been creating from a place of making abstract artwork and really from a kind of intuitive place, but my intentions of why I was creating and really having a practice that felt very nurturing to me and supportive first for my self-care, and then maybe having certain ideas around the project, it really did shift my focus unintentionally just through that. And I had seasons of that previously, like when I had my cancer treatment, like in 2009, that was really for my self-care. And so very grateful that actually I went to my master's program for one idea for art, and I came out in a very different way with how I engage with art that completely transformed my teaching and how I share workshops with people, even how I share teacher trainings and train others of how to share art in the world. So I'm so grateful. We have our own kind of lived experience that makes our path. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I just think that's fabulous that because I could imagine it would have been quite an intense period of your life to be focused on two full-time things, that you've been able to capture the beauty of it, the magic that kept you going, and all these little bits that you'd peppered throughout your day, and that you can share that with others too. I think that's so beautiful that you have evolved through that process as well. It's just so wonderful.
yeah, and it's been so lovely now after working with so many people to hear all the time, like, me too. I feel I've totally felt stuck, or like I can't start, or I have too many things on my plate, or that I'll get to my art later because these other things are more important or a top priority. And really, I'm just so passionate around how can we shift that lens, that filling our own well, securing our own oxygen mask. It sounds cliche, but it's so true. And there's so many ways we can do that. Some people it's through gardening or maybe running, and others it's through our creative practice.
Mm.
And so I'll say just this last part. When I was doing my program years ago, because I loved abstract painting, I remember another woman was doing figurative painting and she painted more realistically. And we had a conversation and she said to me, "What if the point of your art is that you are making the art? It is the fact that you're giving yourself the space to dive into it, that it doesn't need to have this deeper meaning." Although I do have other practices now that I do and teach where you can notice what you're feeling and create deeper meaning. But what if that was enough? And it felt so encouraging to hear that from, one of my peers in my 20s at the time. And so I just love that as a reminder that our creative practice can look like however it needs to look to serve us. And there's so many different possibilities, and that we can find what works through us through these different ways of experimenting.
Yeah, I could imagine that those words would have really resonated, that your peer shared with you, because I remember through my experiences of art school, you have to have a reason and an intent, and be able to justify it and speak to it, which is great, and it's fabulous. Fabulous learning to go through and be trained that way. But to be creative for the sake of creating to fill your own well, I think, isn't that really why we all create at the end of the day? It's from that desire, that I can't put into words, but you just have to make magic with the fingers.
Yes.
Cynthia, I could talk to you all day, and I would really love to, but before we wrap up, I'd love to know, what are you going to share with us for your workshop at Making Zen?
Yes, so I have a workbook that is all related to mindful art experiments as well as mandalas. So a lot of people are familiar with mandalas with drawing in a circle, but I did mention kind of we can play with experimentation, and we also can play with noticing what am I thinking and feeling and making meaning of our marks. So this workbook has practices and invitations that kind of dips your toes into both the experimentation and making deeper meaning of our emotions and marks. So I'm very excited to share that out.
Me too. I can't wait. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I'm so excited. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you about your inspiration and ways of being creative in the world. And I just know that everybody is going to be so inspired by listening to what you've shared with us today, and also by your workshop. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you. I loved our chat, and I love the Making Zen name. Just the whole community and container you've created is really lovely.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me in this creative journey. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And if you'd like to learn more about Making Zen, please check out the links below, where you can find out all about the workshops, creativity, community, and all that kind of good stuff. Wishing you many happy hours of stitching.